Welcome in to PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. And it's time for our weekly Zoom with Ross Grimsley and a special guest, usually from the world of Oriole baseball. And today is no exception as we welcome in Steve Johnson, former Orioles pitcher, originally with the Los Angeles Dodgers organization, played high school ball, pitched at St. Paul's. And want to remind you that the Costas Inn is sponsoring this Zoom. The Costas Inn, always known for being a great place to go and sit down and eat crabs, crab cakes, steaks, whatever it is you want. But now they've stepped up their game since the pandemic and are an incredible place to go take carry out from. The Costas Inn, 4100 North Point Boulevard, 410-477-1975, their website, CostasInn.com. We do welcome in Ross Grimsley. And Ross, you doing good?
Doing well, buddy. Doing well. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm anxious to get going with Steve Johnson.
Yes, sir.
He's a busy man running his own show called Optimal Baseball Performance. And Steve, before we talk about optimal baseball performance and how it's kicking ass, from what I hear from your dad, wanted to ask you something. You and I touched briefly on it about 10 days ago. I said, hey, the baseball season's getting ready to start, and I'm looking at the Orioles pitching, and I'm saying, boy, he would slot in about number 3 starter behind Means and Lyles. And I said, any chance you are sort of feeling a pang to come back? And your answer was?
I mean, obviously you miss it a little bit, but you know, I think my body was telling me a lot of things, even a couple of years ago. And you know, I think when I said no and that was done, I think it was a huge, just like relief, you know, just mentally and all the ups and downs along the way. It's kind of like, okay, I can kind of relax now, which, you know, my career was kind of up and down and just, there was no really relaxing. So that was, you know, I don't miss that part of it. So it's been kind of nice to be home and all that stuff. Although I do miss the competition. I think if I was in good enough shape to do that, I think they would have kept me around a little longer. So it's a two-way street there.
Well, I remember when Dan Duquette was the general manager of the Orioles, I think it was like his second year. And I said something about Arthur Rhodes to him. I said, I talked to Arthur Rhodes, and he goes, and he'd been out, I think, about 5 years then or something like that. And he goes, well, and we were in like sort of a pennant chase, I believe. And he goes, what's he doing now? He goes, I'd like to talk to him. I mean, he's always looking for help. The questions you bring up or raise about your body was telling you certain things about whether it was time to hang it up or not. Does optimal baseball performance help you stay away from injury too, in addition to enhancing performance? If you're performing correctly, do you injure yourself less?
Well, I think that's part of it. We call it a functional strength workout. So it's dealing with a lot of like core stability and balance, making sure right areas of your body that are needed to be either flexible or strong or stable, you know, are those things when it comes to your delivery. So I think in terms of, you know, we're still learning the whole process on what it takes, different things that could be helpful throughout the way. But I think, you know, there's just little things like, you know, obviously they're training to be specifically baseball players and pitchers and hitters, but, you know, in terms of just keeping their body flexible, the easiest thing to do is to also continue playing other sports. You know, you get a lot more movements and things like that when you're younger, just by doing that. You gain strength in different ways by doing that. So, you know, I always kind of let all my parents know that as much as we're trying to train for baseball, and when you're playing football, you should also be kind of, you know, baseball should be in the back of your mind if you want to make sure you're ready for it. But you should also just kind of like be free, play basketball, play football, play soccer, do all those things. You know, even getting into some of the things that could be more helpful, like, you know, it wouldn't be the worst thing to do to be in gymnastics when they're a little bit younger, just to kind of make sure that they're just getting other parts of their body strong. I mean, you look at a gymnast, and their core work is unbelievable. So it wouldn't be the worst thing at 6 to 10 to 11, 12 to have them kind of run a session of that for a year or something. So just kind of see what they like.
Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, when I was reading up a little bit about this, and I'm still trying to understand it better. And I think I'm going to end up having to come out there and see you guys when I come up there to get a little bit better idea. But when a kid comes to you guys right off the bat, you obviously evaluate him with different things. I saw a video on they were doing things with the arm, the pronation, and that type of thing. What exactly, how do you evaluate a kid, and what are you looking for? What are you taking away from what he can do with his arm in a throwing motion or out here or whatever? What are you looking for, and how do you evaluate him?
Well, obviously each test is different, and I was certified in it. That's kind of to know what to look for, and everyone's different. So we've kind of run, I don't know how many, hundreds of kids through it now, and not one person has passed in all flying colors for every single thing. But what they've done is each of those limitations, what we call them, could lead to a different part of the delivery being inefficient energy wise. So it just kind of points out an area that they might need to focus on a little bit more in their functional strength work that could just help them get into a mechanical position a little better, easier, to help them hold a certain point a little better. And all those things are a little different. So you talk about something like pronation of their wrist or their arm in a certain position. If that kid struggles, say he's a high school kid and he struggles doing that, that might make you understand that he's not going to throw a two-seamer too well, or changeup might not be the thing for him in that immediate fix. Maybe you work on something like a splitter, since that's more of like obviously you pronate a little bit, but not as much as maybe a changeup would have to, or so it's little things like that you basically, if it's a 7-year-old, you're not as worried about it. If it's a 16-year-old, you might kind of focus on how to not only help him down the road, but how to help also give him some tips for the now. And that's just go for it.
I'm sorry, go ahead, finish, Steve.
It changes per person. If they're not as flexible, which that's part of the test, then we're not going to tell them to stride further. We're going to work on saying, hey, obviously we want to work on the flexibility first, and if he is flexible, then, and he has a really, really short stride, we know it's not a flexibility issue. It's something else. We look at it like a dominoes. If there's a domino out of place somewhere along the road, when they go through their whole motion, it's not going to quite get to the same end result as it should. We try and get that domino back in place, and that goes individually.
Is that tested? Excuse me for 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that test, just how is it quantified? It's not just your eyeballs, it's a machine that reads stuff into a computer program.
We have a sheet on, it's an app, but it's an eye test. So it's something that I'm looking for, that I've been certified in, that I know what to look for, and certain areas on whether they pass or fail it. And obviously it was a learning curve when you first get started, but now that I've been doing it for a while, I have a pretty good idea on what I'm looking for based on each person.
Right. Now, when you get a, like you said, a 7-year-old is going to be different than a 16-year-old, of course. Is there specific things you look for in a 7-year-old compared to a 10, 11, 12, 16? Is there a different evaluating? Obviously there is, but what do you look for in a younger kid than you would in an older kid?
It's actually, sometimes the younger kids are way, they pass the test way easier, because they just have less, they're constantly moving around a lot of the time, so they don't have the strength that sometimes kind of makes them less flexible. But and sometimes even with our sequencing testing, like they're great. They can move their hips way better than a lot of the older guys, and then so it just varies per person. Obviously with a 7 or 8-year-old, we want to get them started, but I'm also going to let them, they haven't thrown as much or maybe practiced it as much. So even with the whole delivery, I'm not going to be, hey, you can't do that, hey, you can't do this. I'm going to let them be a little bit more to kind of create their own path, while also making sure they don't go too far away from too many bad habits that they can kind of stay away from. And like I said, it changes per person. Everyone has their own arm slot. You know, they're going to create their own stuff. So we don't want to change that too much with a younger kid. We're going to, you know, take things a little slower and let them be them while also kind of molding them in the right direction.
Right. Go ahead, Stan.
I was going to ask you, when somebody comes in, let's say he's 12 to 14 years old, it's usually, obviously, he doesn't bicycle there by himself. It's a parent that comes in.
Right.
How involved is the parent in saying, hey, this is my son, Billy. I want him to be able to do this better, and that better. How much of it is the parent pushing versus the kid saying, I want to get better at such and such, such and such? Or is that what the test does, your eyeball test, that sort of dictates where you're going to go with the kid?
Yeah, I think obviously the parents usually come like, hey, we want to get him more pitching training. He has never had a pitching coach before. We want to make sure he's on the right, you know, he's throwing the ball harder, so we want to make sure he's doing the right thing. And a lot of times when I go over the assessment after we're completed, I usually go over with the parents and the kid and kind of explain what it all means. And I don't get too in depth with it because it's more for me to understand how to coach them, you know, going forward. But it also is eye-opening when they see all these limitations, when they may be the most athletic kid and they're the hardest thrower and they're pretty good. They just want, you know, I just want this. And I'm like, well, when you explain all these things and what it could cause, a lot of times you say, okay, well, these could lead to this, you know, this limitation could lead to this. And it's like, well, I do that. A lot of times before I even see them, you know, throw, you have a pretty good idea sometimes on what they may do. And that's what it helps me do. I can see maybe what their limitations, you know, for them individually could cause. So when I look at their delivery the first time, I might have a good idea on what they might be doing that I could help them with. So, and a lot of times it does show up, but sometimes it doesn't. And you kind of have to go a little bit deeper into how to help them.
When you have that sit down with the parent, is the kid in the room too? So you're kind of, you're explaining to both of them.
Yeah, right. I usually, as soon as we're done the limitation test, in the assessment, I go right up and I say, okay, let's go. And I go back up with the parent, have the kid there. And I want the parent to know too, because a lot of the things we ask them to do, we give them a little bit of homework to where they come in and they'll do a functional strength workout with us. But, you know, in order for them to get better, once a week, not really going to do it. It might be, you know, 2 times or 3 times a week thing. So usually the parents got to be the one to say, hey, you know, did you do your stuff? And we're only talking about like 20 minutes or so of something. But, you know, as a kid, they might not go and home and do it right away. You know, some do. You know, some kids, they'll get better in a couple of weeks. Some of their things will start to kind of go away. They'll be better stable, and stability, core work will get better. And you can tell the kids that go home and do some of the stuff rather than the kids that take a little longer to kind of accomplish some of that.
Ross, I just want to do a quick reset. We're talking to former Orioles pitcher and St. Paul's graduate in Baltimore, and that's Steve Johnson. His business is called Optimal Baseball Performance, located out in Bel Air. The Facebook page is, go to Facebook and type in Optimal Baseball. If you want to email Steve Johnson, go to email him at optimalbaseball@gmail.com. Right now, only the Facebook page, working on a website. Phone number, Steve, tell me if this is right. 410-608-8023.
Yep, that's the one.
All right. Ross, I know you got a couple more questions.
Yeah. Steve, have you followed any of the players that have been doing your camp?
Yeah, I try, and it's funny. Now they have all the Game Changer apps, you know, and all the things you can track all these summer teams and high schools. And I do my best I have like all these, I have about 15 teams saved on it, trying to just, you know, maybe once a week or so, just try and see, you know, who's pitched, who hasn't, who's hit, all that stuff. And it's kind of fun. I don't really have to do much of it because the kids will text me or send me an Instagram thing, or the parents will send me how they're doing. So, which is kind of the fun part. I try and keep it fun and light while we're training, and you know, the work is sometimes maybe not as fun, but if we have a good atmosphere it can help them maybe enjoy coming. And then it also is good to see the results and then them getting excited to let me know, which I think, helps me understand why I'm doing it. That's kind of the good part.
We talked about earlier before we came on about the injury situation. I know in professional baseball, there's more injuries now than ever before. And I think possibly you're onto something that will help prevent some injuries with this type of thing you're doing. Do you see that happening in the future at obviously the professional level? You see more. I mean, guys go down all the time with injuries that we basically rarely saw in the past. I mean, obliques. We weren't allowed to use the word oblique in San Francisco. They just that was a Dick Tidrow goes, don't even say it. But anyway, you got that. You got all these different type injuries, and is that something that you guys think you can help curb in a way in the future?
I mean, I think so. I also know that, you can do everything right with the perfect delivery and efficiency. And sometimes people's bodies just can't handle it. I mean, everyone's kind of built a little different in how they grew up and different, whether it's limitations or, the ways they pitch. And honestly, I think it comes down to also how much they pitch, how much they recover, how if they're doing everything they need to do in between their starts, in between outings, all that stuff. And I think it all comes into play. And, obviously, talking to youth sports, especially, I think that the tournament baseball has kind of hurt things in a way to where they're playing regularly 5 or 6 games a weekend. And they're not playing any leagues, or they're not playing as many leagues, where it's kind of spreading it out through the week. I think that kind of hurts things a lot, to where, we could play as many games. I mean, baseball is meant to be played on a regular basis. And if you have 12 pitchers on your team, you shouldn't run into a position or a situation where you need to throw all those guys. But when you're playing 5 or 6 games in 2 days, well, you're using some kids twice and all that. And I think all the youth sports leading into the amount of pitches that they throw in college and pro ball and high school and all that stuff, it all adds up. So I think you're running into a little bit of that since the game's kind of changed a little bit. But I think in terms of what we're trying to do is, obviously, if we can make you more efficient, kind of use your whole body when you're doing, whether hitting or pitching, obviously that could be helpful. But in terms of, you can't necessarily say it's going to help everybody or it's going to be like the end all be all. But I think it definitely could help, because I think if you're throwing and your arms, you taking a lot of the stress because you're not using your legs, I think you do that for 100 pitches every 5 days, that's going to be a struggle.
Steve, I want to ask you about optimal baseball and your involvement as a businessman. Okay. I mean, that's something you don't get asked an awful lot about, but you're in that fine line, aren't you? Where you're busier than a one-arm paper hanger, but you're not busy enough, or a one-man show like that can't really afford to bring in another teacher. So where are you in that, where you can expand a little bit by making 2 of Steve Johnson? And I know you borrow your dad a little bit, but I know he tells me he wants to be retired. He wants to be out on the golf course. So where are you in that? Is there a sweet spot where you can bring on somebody else?
Yeah, I think, it's trying to bring in the right person. I have a couple of people that I've been kind of keeping in mind, and just trying to figure out the right timing, and obviously I needed enough people to make it work. But then also I can't expand if I don't have the other person there on a regular basis. So there's kind of that tough position, whereas obviously we're a little bit busier in the fall and winter. So I think we'd start there, where we add somebody in those times, and then obviously as we go, we can expand more in the spring and summer. Once we it was just tough, I think, the first year or so. Obviously, we've been doing this a couple of years now, but now I got a facility. We're about just over a year in the new facility. So just trying to figure out the finances and, okay, how much do we even make for a year after paying everything we need to pay, and that side of it's just kind of tough, and you want to bring in the right person, someone that you trust, someone that is going to be good with the kids and all that. And there's a couple people I've kind of brought in, and it's just kind of a learning curve on what to do next. That's all. So I think we're pretty close to kind of making that happen, but we'll see.
Hey, I want to ask you a question about one particular pitcher in the big leagues right now that I'm fascinated, and Ross, you can chime in on this too. Justin Verlander, obviously Hall of Fame career, blows out his has Tommy John surgery in 2020, misses all of last year and all but the beginning of that 2020 shortened season. And he's come back, and it's like unbelievable. Through 13 innings, 3 starts, I think, he's got an earned run average of 069, a whip of the exact same number, 069. He struck out 15 and walked 3, and he's 39 years old. Is it just that he's a phenomenon, or is he using some type of optimal baseball performance, or is he just gifted that he has that?
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's probably a lot of things that go into it. A lot of times when guys get Tommy John, they get to spend a year just basically doing one thing, and that's building their arm back and doing all the exercises that they may not have done every day, in the past, where it's like the only thing that they can do, and they get a year off of throwing, and obviously it doesn't always work out that way. Some guys don't fully come back, but I think that they've kind of done it enough to where that surgery is and the reason, you have parents asking whether a kid at 13 should just get it just to get it, and not realizing, you know what I mean? They're like, should we just get it? Because a lot of these people are coming back stronger. And it's like, well, if you just said, hey, I'm going to do the Tommy John recovery while, maybe in the off season, you'd probably see a lot of the benefits, because most people don't do that. They have, they're playing other sports, or they're doing other things. And when you can only do that all year, for what, I guess it's 9 months till they're 10 months till they're fully back. They get to basically just do that the whole time, along with the fact that he's already one of the best pitchers in baseball before that. So it's not like, he's just went from a nobody to where he is now. And obviously he has the money and things to kind of make sure he can do everything for his body. I mean, once you get to that point, that age, you've been playing that long, you've made more than enough money to make sure that everything you do is dedicated to making sure you're the best to possibly be that way. I mean, that's the Tom Brady's, the LeBron James, you get to make that much money, and now all of a sudden you can hire all the people to make sure that you need to do this, and the vitamins and all this stuff. And, if you dedicate yourself that much, then, you have that opportunity.
So let me throw one pitcher at you, and I'm not meaning for you to really prognosticate on this or something. When John Means came up in, I think it was 2019, he credited Chris Holt with teaching him like a new way to throw his changeup, and he had tremendous results with it. But each year he's pitched, he's broken down some. He's missing a fairly sizable chunk of the season. Is there something that's happened to him, in your estimation, from the changeup, only the changeup, that maybe is caused this? It's also caused him to be a really successful pitcher when he's pitching.
Obviously I can't say, I don't know exactly how he throws his changeup. I don't think it's, too extreme or anything. It doesn't look like it, at least. It could just be he's getting older. Things start to just, innings start to add up, and it could be just one of those things, and it's unfortunate. Obviously you do all this training all off season and everything, and then you go out there and pitch your first game, and things happen. Also, you shortened spring training this year. Not that it is what it is. Other people went out and did it, but maybe just somewhere down the road you didn't get exactly what he needed to get to, or like I said, it's just things happen. It's unfortunate, and I think the changeup is probably, unless he's pronating an absurd amount or something, it's your arm naturally pronates. So
right.
I don't think that would be the reason. It would be more if he was throwing a bunch of cutters or sliders. I think that might be.
You know what he started. A couple of years ago, he hurt his shoulder. He was throwing harder than he did the year before, and his changeup wasn't as good. So he went back to doing what he did previously, and he had started having success again. So you see a lot of guys. I mean, they as a pitcher, you got to find the amount of percentage to put into a pitch to locate the ball correctly, and it's not 110%. No one rarely can do that. You know, when you just basically balls out, you're throwing as hard as I can. That doesn't work, and I think that's where possibly some of that stuff started with that shoulder problem, and he broke down. You know, that you've seen it for years. You know, guys trying to throw harder than they're capable of throwing. First of all, they can't throw it where they want to, and you see that a lot now. And you see some of the things, but I think that happened with him. He just tried to do more than he's capable of doing for whatever reason, but then he got back to doing what he normally did and had success.
Let me just throw one thing out. You couldn't draw up a worse thing to happen for pitchers than what's happened in 2020, 2021, and 2022, where you had extremely shortened season where nobody threw their real innings total, you know, for the season, then ramping up to have a season where they needed to go back up to a higher number. Very few did. Like Robbie Ray threw 183 innings last year. But now you've got the shortened spring training this year. That's got to be incredibly difficult to really stay healthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, just
I finally made one, Ross. If I talk long enough, I make a good one once in a while.
You know, routine's very important. I mean, they shut down guys in the minor leagues based on innings, and you know, it doesn't make the fans happy sometimes. And you know, when the guy gets shut down in September, and it's like, well, he never pitched that much before, and the major league season is longer than any season that anyone, you know, been through in their lives. So you know, and every day, 5 days a week, you know, even in college, guys aren't used to the 5 days a week. They're on a weekly schedule for the most part. So getting in the 5 days a week, you know, rotation is something you got to kind of build into. And, you know, I wish that, you know, they'd let guys go. I know with me personally, you know, I saw where as a starter, you're getting taken out in the minors at 90, 91 pitches, 92 pitches. They're not letting you kind of go into that. Obviously later in the season, they might here and there let you go, but you know, then you come up to the big leagues and they kind of expect you to go that much, and sometimes not even. They kind of take you out at 92 pitches. They don't want you to reach the 100 pitches and have to take you out. And I just think that for me, I knew that if I was used to throwing 115 pitches, that I'd get a lot better at throwing 115 pitches, and that's why the aces are the way they are. They throw 120 pitches kind of on a regular basis if they let them, but you know, also that it's 5 days a week and it's just tough. You got to do everything you need to do in between.
Steve, I think one of the problems with that is a guy can throw 80 pitches in a close game. A guy can throw 125 pitches easy, and that 125 pitches takes less out of him than a guy that threw the 80 pitches.
Yep.
And I don't think people, especially now, understand that, because they don't know, right? You know, and that's a big thing. And like you said, and where one of the problems now is they don't let guys pitch. They think this is the most well-rested generation of players and the worst fundamental players of ever. And because that a lot of times I'm sitting here with a friend of mine, a scout for the Giants here at my house right now. He goes, they have Mondays off in the minor leagues. They take 12 o'clock games on Sunday. They got Monday off, and then they'll take a hot day off. They're not on the field working. They don't get on the field and do what they used to do. Where are you going to get better at? It's certainly not the weight room, and it's certainly not looking at videos. You're going to get better on the field. That'll never change.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, there's parts where those things come into play, but it's also, you need feel, you need to get out there, you need to throw your pitches, you need to make sure that you do what's best for you. You know, there's guys that go out there and they could throw every day because they're used to throwing every day, and there's other guys that out there that, you know, okay, hey, I know my body, I'm going to take this day off, and then I'm going to get right back at it the next day. It's kind of understanding not to force it when you don't want to or don't need to, And then there's also the time where it's like, don't take too much time off. I mean, I got in the problem in my career where I took 3 months off in the off season. I didn't even pick up a baseball. I thought that I was doing something good. And really, I should have been obviously throwing more, at least playing catch once, twice, 3 times a week.
Exactly.
And just keeping my arm where it needed to be. And I took way too much time off thinking that was a good thing. And then I come back and I'm trying to figure out my delivery again after, all that time. So it's like, that's kind of what I'm trying to teach now is I'm like, hey, like you might be playing other sports, but keep throwing. Just doesn't have to be too much. Get off on a short mound and just kind of go through your pitches. And just the more you throw, the better you'll get, and the more conditioned your arm will be to throwing all the time. And like you said, they go by innings a lot of time instead of pitches. I mean, I threw 100 pitches. I threw a lot of pitches. I was a 5-inning guy, 6-inning guy. I very rarely got more. I struck out a lot of guys. I was effectively wild, is what I'll say, and I made it work. But it's like my 100 pitches in 6 innings is different than someone else's 100 pitches in 8. It just is. And on stressful innings, how many times do you have a guy on second and third? How many guys you throw? How many pitches are you throwing with 2 outs in a big situation? Like those pitches are going to be, a lot more stress induced and all that. So there needs to be some sort of formula, I think, and maybe they have it, but some sort of thing where it's like 2 strike pitches or 2 out pitches, those types of things added up throughout the course of the game. And then, you figure out how stressful that guy's outing was.
Steve, I told you I'd get you out of here in a half an hour, and I want to be true to my word. I know you got a busy day ahead of yourself. His name is Steve Johnson, former Orioles pitcher, pitched at St. Paul's in Baltimore when he in high school. His company is Optimal Baseball Performance. The Facebook page is Optimal Baseball on Facebook. If you want to email him with a question or comment, optimalbaseball at Gmail, optimalbaseball@gmail.com. Phone number 410-608-8023. His facility is out in the Bel Air area. Steve, we really wish you luck and appreciate your coming on. When we ask you, we'll help promote it for you. All right?
Well, I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank
Tell
you,
your mom
Rob.
and dad hi.
I will.
How's your
All
mom
right.
doing?
They're good. Everyone's
Good. Tell them we said hi.
All right.
We'll do.
All right,
All
buddy.
right. Want to remind you that today's, and Steve, you don't have to hang around for this. I know you're busy. Want to remind folks that we're brought to you by the Costas Inn, 4100 North Point Boulevard. Their phone number 410-477-1975, or go to the website to see their menu, carryout menu, costasinn.com. We'll see you next Monday, and I'll be back with Kevin Byrne on Thursday night with Gary Stein right here. Thank you for joining us. Bye.